There are football clubs that define eras, clubs that dominate leagues, win trophies, and build global empires. But before all of that, before television deals, before billionaire owners, before the Champions League anthem echoed across Europe, football was just an idea. A chaotic game played in muddy fields by men who were still trying to figure out what the rules were, and in the middle of all that chaos, one club appeared. A club founded not when football was famous, but when football still was being invented. In 1862, in the industrial city of Nottingham, a group of gentlemen decided to form a football club. They called it Notts County. At the time, nobody could have imagined what football would become. There were no leagues, no global audiences, no transfer market. Just a ball, a field, and a game that had not yet found its shape. But somehow, this club would survive it all. World wars, financial collapses, relegations into the depths of English football. And yet, more than 160 years later, Notts County still exists. Not as a giant club, not as a super club, but as something perhaps even more extraordinary. A living reminder of where football began, and this one begins before football even knew what it was. Welcome to Hidden Club Stories, where every club carries a story. This is the story of Notts County. This episode is sponsored by Hidden Shirt Club. They sell football shirt mystery boxes with the real stories. When Notts County was founded in 1862, football didn't look anything like it does today. There were no standard rules. Different schools and towns played completely different versions of the game. Some allowed players to carry the ball, others banned it completely. Matches often ended in confusion, arguments, and sometimes even fights. But in cities like Nottingham, something new was happening. Football was slowly evolving from a chaotic pastime into an organized sport. Notts County became one of the clubs helping shape that transition. In the early years, the club played friendly matches against local sides, experimenting with rules that would eventually become part of the modern game. Players wore heavy wool shirts, the pitches were uneven, often very muddy, and surrounded by curious spectators rather than organized stands. Yet, slowly, football began to spread. By the 1870s, crowds were growing, and with them the idea that football could become something bigger than a weekend pastime. Notts County was there from the very beginning, watching the sport take its first uncertain steps. As the 19th century, football changed rapidly. Industrial cities across England were embracing the game. Factories and working class communities adopted football as their sport. Crowds became larger, matches became more competitive, and eventually a controversial idea emerged. What if players were paid? For many traditionalists, this was unthinkable. Football was something to be amateur, a gentleman's game. But reality was different. Working class players couldn't afford to travel and play without compensation, so in 1885, professionalism was finally legalized. And just 3 years later, something revolutionary happened. In 1888, the Football League was created, the first organized football league in the world. Notts County was one of its founding members. They were no longer just witnesses to football history, they were helping to write it. For the first time, clubs competed in a structured league table, season after season, match after match. Football had become a sport, and Notts County had been there since the beginning. Some football clubs influenced the game in ways that reach far beyond their own city. Notts County is one of them. In the early 20th century, a young Italian club was searching for inspiration. They admired the elegance of English football, and they admired the look of one particular team, Notts County. In 1903, that Italian club decided to adopt the same colors, black and white stripes. The club was Juventus. Today, Juventus is one of the most famous clubs in the world, but their iconic colours were inspired by a team from Nottingham. A quiet connection between two clubs separated by geography but linked by football history. For a long time, Notts County existed at the very heart of English football. But football, like every living thing, changes with time. The sport that Notts County helped shape began to grow far beyond anything its founders could have imagined. Television arrived, money followed, clubs became global institutions rather than local gatherings, and slowly, almost quietly, the balance of power began to shift. The giants of English football grew richer, more powerful, more visible. Meanwhile, clubs like Notts County, built in another era, for another kind of football, struggled to keep pace. There was no single moment when everything collapsed, instead the decline began gradually, season by season and relegation by relegation. What had once been a founding member of the Football League slowly drifted further away from the top of the game it helped to create. Supporters who walked through the turnstiles at Meadow Lane carried a strange contradiction with them. They supported one of the oldest clubs in football history, yet watched their team fight battles far away from the spotlights. And still, they kept coming. Because football loyalty rarely follows logic. It follows memory, it follows belonging. And in Nottingham, Notts County was more than a football club. It was a link to the very origins of the sport. But history alone cannot guarantee survival. And by the early 21st century, that truth became impossible to ignore. Financial instability, ownership problems and years of sporting decline pushed the club closer and closer to the edge. For the first time in its long existence, the future of Notts County felt uncertain. Not uncertain in a sporting sense, but uncertain in the most fundamental way a football club can be, whether it would exist at all. In 2019, the moment finally arrived. A moment that many supporters had feared for years. After a season of struggle, Notts County were relegated from the Football League. It was a historic fall, not just because of the division, but because of what it represented. For the first time in the history, the world's oldest professional football club was no longer part of the professional league structure it had helped create more than a century earlier. The drop into the National League felt symbolic, as if history itself had slipped out of the spotlight. For some clubs, this kind of fall marks the beginning of the end. Budgets collapse, supporters disappear, momentum fades. But something different happened in Nottingham. Even in the 5th year of English football, Meadow Lane did not fall silent. Crowds continued to gather, scarves continued to rise above the stands. Because for many supporters, supporting Notts County had never been about status, it was about continuity, about protecting a piece of football history that still exists in the present day. And slowly, almost stubbornly, the club began to rebuild. New ownership stabilized the club. A long-term vision replaced the chaos of previous years. Players arrived who believed in the project, and once again hope began to grow. Then came the season that changed everything, the 2022-2023 National League campaign. At first, it looked like a normal promotion race, but as the months passed, something extraordinary began to unfold. Notts County and Wrexham were pulling away from the rest of the league. Week after week, both clubs kept winning. Records were broken. Points totals climbed to unprecedented heights. And suddenly, what should have been a quiet, non-league title race became one of the most watched football stories in the world. Every match felt decisive, every goal felt historic. The race between the two clubs pushed both teams to levels rarely seen at that level of football. In the end, only one club could win the title. But even after missing out on automatic promotion, Notts County refused to let their story end there. Through the tension of playoffs, the club fought its way back. And when the final penalty confirmed promotion, it felt like the restoration of something older. something that had survived every transformation football had gone through. Football today is a global industry. It is played in billion-euro stadiums, watched by millions across every continent. But beneath all that spectacle, the game still carries traces of where it began. Of muddy pitches, of improvised rules, of clubs created simply because a group of people love the game. Notts County is one of those traces. A living bridge between the sport's earliest days and its modern reality. More than 160 years after its founding, the club still walks onto the pitch every weekend. Not as a symbol of domination, not as a global brand, but as something perhaps more meaningful. A reminder that football did not begin with television deals or superstars, it began with clubs like this. Clubs built by communities long before the world was watching, and as long as Notts County continues to exist, a piece of football's beginning will still be alive. Thank you for watching this episode of Hidden Club Stories. If you want to discover more clubs with identity, history and soul, make sure to subscribe, because somewhere out there, another story is already waiting.